How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we have a great discussion today. We're going to talk about the multi-hat challenge. Guys, in corrections, correctional officers, correctional staff in general, we wear many hats depending on what the situation calls for. And for some people, they may see this as the softer side of corrections because there's a lot of correctional officers that may only feel they wear one hat. And that one hat solely relates to safety and security. And if they take that hat off and they switch it with another one, they become vulnerable. Guys, we do wear many hats. I mean, literally, whatever the situation prepares us for. So this dialogue is going to give us 5 tips to help us adjust to the many hats that we wear in corrections, whether you're a correctional officer or a correctional civilian staff. This should really be applied to pretty much everyone, including middle management, because middle management definitely wears a lot of hats because we oversee a lot of functions. So depending on the function, what the priority is, as Connie, who's going to be our guest, she said before what lens you're looking through. She's our guest for today. You know, you have to wear the hat accordingly, and we'll explain that as we go through, but it's definitely a good dialogue. And guys, remember, guys, I know some people may feel that we're stuck in the one role. And guys, the thing about corrections is your ability to adapt and adjust matters, because when you adapt and adjust, how you see things, like Connie said, how you see things matters. And we're going to definitely get to that. Now, guys, before I introduce Connie, just want to go over some of my sponsors. We have American Military University. If you guys are looking to get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. I know a lot of you guys are even going there. That's awesome. But again, guys, if you're looking to bring experience back into the classroom, guys, please check out American Military University. It's a great online school, very supportive of what we do in corrections, very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. We also have my book is on the market, Inmate Manipulation Decoded. It's a great book. It's used for training all across the country. Found out recently it was available in Barnes & Nobles. That's pretty cool. Again, if you guys want to get that book, the link to that is in the description. It's available on Amazon. I also have another book on the market, Lessons Learned While Working in Prison, My Journey from Officer to Administration. This book is full of tips that will help you in your career, not just from me, but many other people that work in this profession from all levels, all departments. So guys, if you're looking just for some little tidbits, some little passages every day you can read to kind of give you some tips or advice, please check out that book. The link to that is also in the description. Guys, we also have these posters are doing very well. It's a poster 18 signs that you're overly involved with an inmate. That's my daughter there posing it. If you're looking to get that poster, there's an email that you'll have to email, and they'll tell you how to go about doing it in bulk. That poster's been doing very well. The email is nassahs22@gmail.com. So remember that, nassahs22@gmail.com. You email them, they'll give you the specifics. And we also have the Tier Talk mugs. There they are. And the link to that is also in the description. See, guys, I lost the sponsor, so now I'm trying to make up for it by doing products. Now let me get Connie on because she's been waiting so patiently. Connie!
Hello. I feel like it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been. Actually, someone gave me a comment the other day for you that they love your hair. So there's no way they could have saw it in this episode because we haven't sent it out. So it must have been from an older episode because your hair looks great again today. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we haven't been a while. Let me throw those compliments out there. You look beautiful. Your skin is radiant. Your hair is beautiful.
Oh my God. Deanna, where are you to save me?
Man, send 2 compliments. You already called my wife. Man, I'm married, Connie. I'm married. I just can't believe this. I just feel so insulted. Hey, Connie, do you mind? Hey, let's talk about you for a second before we go into the show. So if you don't mind introducing yourself, but how's the business going? How's Civilian Corrections Academy going? How's your book going?
So Civilian Corrections Academy is going great. We started out the year with quite a few facilities on the docket. And so it's been a great start to the year. We pretty much provide training to non-uniform employees who work in the correctional environment. And the intention is to ensure that non-uniform staff are actually ready, right? Like when they show up to work and they get in the mix of things, that they can be a reliable piece of intelligence, right? Like, because a lot of times I think that's a lot of the argument or the discussion that I've had with custody folks throughout the nation, it is that, yeah, sometimes non-uniform staff are so focused and zoned in on like their specific role that they may not always be aware of the safety and security side of things. And so through the Civilian Corrections Academy, try to make sure that they are aware. And, it's great to be getting calls from folks too, right? So after they take the training and they're going through things at work, being able to establish a pretty decent rapport has been awesome. We recently were invited to another state to come and do some staff appreciation for the non-uniform staff. So like, it's really kind of been having a life of its own. And the book, The Cage Was Her Cocoon, a journey from prison administrator to entrepreneur, that's doing well as also. I do a lot of sales on my own. People are still reaching out for autographed copies and I send them right out. So if you haven't gotten your copy yet, feel free. Amazon, Amazon's out there, right? But if you want an autographed copy, you need to go to thecagewashercocoon.com and order your copy from there.
Smart. I mean, I agree with that. Plus, Amazon be taking 50% of our profit. We do it the other way. We get a little more. People think that we make profit off this work that we do. And it's not what people think. So Connie, I got the multi-hat challenge because I was reading 360 Degrees of Leadership, which is actually a John Maxwell book. Guys, big fan of his stuff. I have the hardcover behind me, but I also have it on Kindle. And guys, to be in corrections, obviously we're aware that there's so many different situations that happen to us every day that our ability to adapt and adjust is kind of what I mean by saying we're wearing different hats, because literally the different hats relate to the situation that we're dealing with. Because I would like to think that we go in and every time there's a situation, no matter what the situation that we're in, I'm always going to be a CO, let's say, or Connie's always going to be a medical provider. It's not how it works, because once we understand what's needed from that situation, we may be the first ones that are going to have to switch our hat and play whatever role we got to play until the right people, the professionals, get involved and hopefully, help us solve the situation. But Connie, let's just talk about that real quick. The many hat challenge, the multi-hat challenge. I mean, our need, even for civilians, to adapt and adjust really does require us to wear a lot of hats. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So we know that our environment is a fluid environment, right? Like this, it's so dynamic. There's always so many things going on, and no day is like the previous day, right? And no situation is like the previous situation. There's always some added component, some different, factor that wasn't a factor at the time. I think about many times, like even when we respond to codes, right? Like you just never know what you're coming across when you get to the code, right? And just think like officer may be the first one to respond, just as an example, right? And so he's wearing officer hat, but now he's also first responder hat. That officer hat is off, first responder hat is on, medical comes on the scene, he takes off the first responder hat, medical jumps in. And then there's a point where there's other things that the officer needs to do in that space of the code, right? And depending on whether, the inmate is combative or whatever the situation is, right? I feel like that's the thing. Like we always got to be prepared to adapt and adjust.
Yeah, I love what you said too, because at the very beginning you said the officer has to kind of take off one hat and put on another, but you kind of also said it in context where you're not really, even though you said you let go of the hat, it's still the foundation. Like all because I'm wearing this hat doesn't mean I'm no longer the CO. It's just I have a shift in priority, at that point, and it does make a lot of sense, because I love when you said the medical scenario. I mean, for me, I've dealt with inmates that as custody, a medical situation occurs, and while we're waiting for medical to respond, our hat's going to switch. It's going to play the medical role, but of course, we're making sure the scene is safe and secured. So there's a two-hat function, if you will. But eventually, when the scene is safe and secure, whatever it is, my hat's going to switch, and I'm going to stay focused on the medical side of things until the medical team arrives and they take on their role, and then I can go back and assume the role as needed, especially maybe we're partnering on CPR, whatever it is, but you assume the role as needed.
Even if it's not just something like CPR, say there's a mental health situation, right? like where officer is officer who's still securing the scene and trying to make sure, you know, the housing unit or wherever it happened, right, wherever the decompensation of this mental health patient has taken place, that the officer is already in this mode of, I got to make sure people are safe, the scene is safe. But then also, you know, he's de-escalating, he's probably trying to talk this inmate down, like whatever that intervention that's required has now required to sort of put aside for a moment sort of just the officer component, and now he's stepping into this role where he is being more of a sort of mental health professional until that psych or social worker or whomever comes in to kind of take over this crisis intervention. So like, I feel like there's so many ways that, you know, the officer is already required to be able to wear multiple hats, right? Because they don't know what today's crisis is going to require.
And guys, that's why it's so important. And we'll talk about civilians too, but that's why it's so important for custody officers, you know, people that are officers, correctional officers, whatnot, to have some level of training in so many different areas, because at any time your role can switch, and you have to be able to adapt and adjust with whatever little expertise you may have from that training. Like Connie said, dealing with those with mental health. And I know in here, John Maxwell says something great, and we'll put it here first. Well, he says here, remember that the hat sets the context when interacting with others. And he adds a little bit to that by saying the goal often determines the role and the approach to take. You want to hear something that Connie said that was spot on to me was, there's going to be many times where you're going to be switching hats, trust and believe, just as situations occur. But one of the times is going to be de-escalation. Now, granted, it should be in our ability to de-escalate as custody. But when they teach you how to de-escalate, they're trying to give you the mindset of someone who has some level of experience with dealing with individuals that could have mental health concerns, or individuals that are highly aggressive or aggravated, you know, like, so maybe a little social worker skill tipped in there, or some psychological, you know, skill that could be taught to you from the mental health department. I mean, but either way, you're tapping into a skill to help de-escalate, and that becomes part of who you are. That adds to your foundation of being that correctional officer, if you will. But having said that, I love when the goal often determines the role and the approach you take. So if my goal is to de-escalate, then what I'm going to do, and it's de-escalate, you know, there's no threat right now, just to de-escalate, I may want to try to switch hats, you know, and pull onto another hat. Still safety and security in mind, don't get me wrong, but let me tap into some of the other functions that I'm learning to see if I can make an effort to de-escalate. Yeah, what do you got? I know you have a thought there.
The thing I wanted to add to that is that it's really important that, so through the training and through cross training and all that stuff, when officer is in the moment of this event, right, whatever that is, it's also being able to distinguish, right, like, which is, I think, an added skill, like being able to distinguish between this is a behavioral issue versus a mental health decompensation issue, right? Like, which also means officer has to pull on his skills to be able to identify the difference, right? When this is just not an inmate acting up, but this is an inmate who's truly decompensating. And I think that's like, there's like almost a fine line there where we have an expectation as an institution, right, that the officer can tell the difference, so that to this point about context, he's responding with the appropriate context and goal in mind, right? Like because if you know this is more of a behavioral issue, this inmate may escalate and become combative, right? But if you're thinking in your mind the context of mental health decompensation, your approach to that situation is going to be different, as well as what you think the end goal should be. So I think this is a really good tip for us to just bear in mind.
Yeah, because, and again, when it comes to training, this is stuff that has to be introduced to somebody, because if I don't know what that hat consists of, or if that hat even exists, then I'm stuck in the same role. And the funny thing is, like you said, the goal determines the role. Well, I'm not going to have a different role. So my goal may be ultra aggressive when the time really doesn't need that. you know? So and again, I love the fact that you said de-escalating, because that's where you can actually start to see the shift in how they want the officers to be, to embrace the softer side. And guys, whether you agree with it or not, I have to teach it the way the world is happening. And that's what's happening. They want people to embrace the softer skills. And that's a good thing. You know, it is, because as I've grown up in this profession, I've moved up, I'm on the administrative level. I'd rather not have codes, to be honest with you. I'm 45, you know, I'm being honest with you. We don't want codes. If things could be settled without having a code, that's a lot less liability, you know, from all levels, you know. So understanding that role and then being able to adjust to that and kind of stay in that role, balanced, but kind of stay into that role, I think is truly effective. But as again, remember that the hat sets the context when interacting with others. Like Connie said, it's true. You know, if I'm looking to de-escalate, I put on the right hat, and then I have to stay focused within the context of that hat. But again, the foundation is still the custody side. We're not breaking away from that, but I'm adding to it. Now let me ask you, Connie, because I think that touches on something. I know I don't want to ignore that. The switching of hats is really not so much like, I know we kind of threw it out in general, but let me just explain a little more. We may say taking off one hat and putting on another, and I get that. That's kind of just saying it very simple. But to be honest with you, when it comes to wearing many hats, it kind of looks like this. You know, just putting one hat on top of the, come on, I got no neck right now trying to show a scenario. Could you not have caught me after the second hat? Like, honestly, I just lost my neck trying to do this whole scenario, and you're just letting me go lower and lower in the damn chair. You know, you could have went, okay, Ganji, I got your thought. I have no other hats here. All I could do is just shrink.
You do got one more in the back, but we got your thought. We get it.
Oh, so you get it? Like, you have the what? Hold on, I got a bad back and I'm 45 years old.
Oh my
So,
God.
but you get that thought, right? The hats are kind of going on top of each other. Yeah. So, Connie, what's your thoughts on that?
It's like anything we do, right? Anything we do is going to require us to tap into all the skills we've acquired over the years, right? Over our time in the space, and even sometimes skills that we didn't acquire in there, right? I just need to use this particular skill to get this situation under control, or to handle the situation that I'm presented with today. And so sometimes that is a requirement of switching hats or interchanging hats or wearing all the hats at the same time, because all the skills are required. But I think the key is we always kind of build on what we know, and we try to adjust and use different tools that may help us in whichever scenario we're faced with. It's not necessarily you're throwing a hat away, right? Because that knowledge doesn't go away. The knowledge is there, and you're kind of just pulling on all of the tools in your tool chest until you get the outcome that you're looking for.
And that's why it's good that we have these dialogues, because we built some clarity to it. You know, as I said, I mean, when we started, it was switching hats off with the other, but us keeping in mind that there's still a different foundation for each of us. You're building on top, because at any moment, you know, you may have to go back to that role when the other people come in and play their priority role. I think most of the time, to be honest with you, the switching of hats or whatever it is, or the switching of what hats being utilized at that time, if you will, however you want to word it, is really, yes, it's situational until the right people can come in and take over.
Correct.
You know, now, Connie, the next thing, I like this part. It says, don't use one hat to accomplish a task required for another hat. Now, this is what we were talking about just a little bit at the beginning, but we'll talk about a little bit now. If you're very limited in your training in regards to certain skills that are required to deal with human behavior, which is usually communication skills, empathy skills, stuff like that, that kind of show
soft skills.
What is it?
Soft skills that we typically don't want to refer to.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You're right. Soft skills, you know, because believe it or not, empathy is still safe. There's a boundary there, but having empathy gives you a chance to kind of adapt and adjust, because you're kind of seeing things from that perspective, but not overwhelmed by that person's perspective. But having the ability to kind of be able to shift when appropriate is great. But when you don't have that ability, the problem here is that your effort to solve it may not equal the means needed to do so. Like, so if you have an inmate that, and we kind of touched on this, but we could expand a little more, an inmate that is having a mental health breakdown, and the only hat I wear at all times is custody, safety, and security. Well, now I'm going in maybe a little bit aggressive when I could take off a hat, switch the hat, you know, or build on top, whatever it is, and then have that hat for the right function. But at any time, if shit hits the fan or it swaps over, I can always go back to my original
and
hat.
in that instance, unfortunately, that aggressive sort of response will only exacerbate the mental health issue. Right. And so here it is, you want to be helpful, because I think that's part of it too. Being able to acknowledge that this might be the only skills that I have. I'm trying to be helpful. There has to be a point where I have to acknowledge that these skills are not helping the situation, and I'm gonna fall back so that those who have the appropriate skills can do so. So I think being able to not only just recognize that some hats aren't required for a particular situation, it's also being able to recognize that the hat I have right now is not appropriate, and I may need to lean on someone else to help me with the situation I'm being faced with.
And guys, let me add something. The hat we're wearing is still a professional hat that's still defined by boundaries. In no way did I tell you you're going to be an inmate's mother. You're going to be an inmate's son, daughter. I want people to know that. Like, you're still playing out a role of another professional function, because somewhere along the line you have tapped into some training on that, which the agency should be giving you. For the civilian side, I've seen educators refer inmates to programs. I've seen educators talk inmates down from doing foolish things. So, I mean, just another side of the civilian perspective. So they're definitely switching hats depending on the moment. And I've even seen many different roles, not just custody, but even the civilian side respond, which I think I gotta be careful of that, but I have seen it to protect somebody. I have seen civilians, when an officer is getting overwhelmed, let's say they're caught up and something's happening to the officer and the officer is waiting for that response for protection. I've seen civilians that have that respect that will jump in and help the officer, deal with the inmate that's being aggressive. I've seen personality conflicts technically sometimes between an officer and inmate. And then all of a sudden you may get the educator or the mental health professional come around. They're talking to the inmate to help them, calm down, but they're also helping provide a safety and security function to some extent because they're stopping something from happening that could escalate. So, again, just trying to show both sides of the coin, because obviously you see a lot of those interactions with custody as well. But I just wanted to show a side that gives the civilians a chance to kind of take off their hat and wear some different ones. But what about medical, Connie? I mean, do you ever see medical switch some hats, and basically
I think there are instances where mental health, so yeah, I get it. Like, our roles are very clearly defined, right? But I think that sometimes there are operational challenges where, medical may be called into the conversation, right? Because sometimes when we're troubleshooting or we're trying to problem solve, it's a matter of having another perspective, right? Because custody may come up with this solution, but the solution may not work because of something that may not necessarily be in that person's purview, right? And I find that when you do include others that may be outside of sort of the custody role, they can sometimes bring insights to the table that you wouldn't normally have, right? Like, so I can think of, for example, there was a point where we were locking down the facility, and even though the intention was to control movement, and that was, I think, the immediate response, right? We want to control movement. We want to make sure a facility is locked down. But we still had an issue with medication, right? We still needed to go out and do meds. And so the initial, I guess, suggestion was, well, we were going to go cell to cell in order to accomplish this. And certainly, with the volume of meds people are on, it just wasn't practical. But one of the nurses brought up that there was an issue bringing like the med cart down the corridor because of a particular gate that didn't open, right? It opened, but it wasn't the size that the actual med cart could fit through. So here it is, we're making these plans, right? And we're almost forcing medical is going to go cell to cell, but we didn't have the capacity to do it. That's not a lens that custody would necessarily have. about the med card, right? That's only something that someone from medical would be able to bring to their attention. So of course we came up with another plan. But I feel those are the kind of things that can happen where we're structuring some sort of change or an operational adjustment, and we don't necessarily have all the right people at the table or diverse people at the table, right? Like, because the diversity of thought is what helps us to innovate. And I feel like that's where we get sort of the goodness that we bring, and we include everyone in sort of these conversations so that we can get the best solution possible, but also we also show that, you know what, this person's insights or their perspective adds value, right?
You know, I love what you're saying. Like when I have like a department head meeting, or when I have a meeting that's meant to help address another department's concern, especially as middle management, I try my best to wear their hat to see where they're coming from. And then for the people that may need to help this department solve that goal, I try to do my best to let them understand that perspective of that department, you know, and then there'll be some that may not be willing to wear the hat. It's like, no, you got to wear the hat, because at the end of the day, this isn't about you. This is about this department. So we're trying to kind of be pro-social here. So sometimes when just even at the highest of levels, middle management definitely wearing it all the time, you know, when a department has a concern, it's good for you to kind of switch hats. And like Connie said before, see it in that lens so you can be as effective as you can for them, as opposed to me seeing it from my lens and then pushing my perspective, which at the end won't help that department because it doesn't help solve their issue. So again, or another way we could do it also is if you have a problem, again, sort of with the many hats here, and we're making the effort and it doesn't work and we have to compromise, sometimes it's good for the department that has the issue to wear our hat.
Absolutely.
You know, so maybe we just have a meeting where we just throw our hats around in the middle of the table. You know what I mean? Just going crazy. But
well, I mean, as much as that sounds crazy, the visual is probably most effective, right? Like that if we did visually show people that here's all the hats everyone wears, we need you to pick up a hat that's not your own and try to walk in those shoes for a moment.
Yo, did we just come up with like a icebreaker game at one of our conferences?
We did.
Oh my God. That's pretty cool, because we can come up with a problem that pretty much, you know, maybe each, depending on the hat, you know, you would look at it differently. Because that's another thing, guys. I mean, even if there's never really one solution, because there's many ways to look at a problem. So I think it is great to kind of wear that hat and see how that department sees that problem. But also, if you have the problem and you're not getting the solution you want, now it's your turn to put on someone else's hat and try to get an understanding of why you're not getting that solution you want.
But imagine some of us work in such silos that if I put on someone else's hat, I have no idea what their lens is.
Yeah. Well, that's where, to be honest with you, Connie, so guys, this is really intentional growth on your end. This is where you have to always be open to understand other people's perspective, because you're right. You know, Connie, I mean, there's only so much that can be trained, but if you're not empathetic, it doesn't matter what hat you wear, because you're never going to see it from anybody else's perspective. But again, that's where, you know, I think for me, when you have meetings and you're looking to learn from the people's perspective, you ask more questions than you're actually looking to hear your own voice. And that allows you to get that empathetic perspective. But you're right. If you're not empathetic, I can give you all hats all day. It's
right. It's if you can't even, so one, I think it's the learning and knowing what's going on in other departments. But if you can't even imagine, like, so what impact does it have on another department to do this thing, right? Like, if, for example, like I think about, you know, we were in the clinic one day and they were like, oh, we'll just take the escort officer from the medication line. And like, it was a newer person who really didn't understand the operation, right? But even still, here's this slight change, right? Because you think, oh, it's just the escort officer, no big deal. He can go do something else while they take care of the meds, right? We already bring the inmates here. But when you don't know that officer is also doing mouth checks, right? You don't recognize the safety and security concern that you've just created by removing that person, right? Like, how many times do we have inmates trying to divert meds on Medline? right? And so this officer has a function other than just escorting, right? And I think that's part of it, that we have to learn enough about the operation to understand that if we make a change or we go and do something, what is the ripple effect that it will have?
And that's intentional.
Right.
You know, I was thinking as you're saying this. So let's say, because these applies in the home life. Let's say I'm home playing a video game and I'm loving it. Just loving playing the video game. And my wife notices that the dishes aren't done. And of course she made dinner. I mean, she made the mess. I mean, she made the dinner, but it is what it is. What? I know, Connie, you're shocked about this too. Me too. And, you know, so I'm sitting there and she's like, Tony, you got to get up and wash the dishes. And I'm like, wait a second, wear my hat. So when she wears my hat, maybe she'll be open to seeing how much I'm enjoying what I'm doing, playing the game, how fun the game actually is. And then here's the key from wearing a hat. How rude is she to ask me during that time?
Is that right?
Yep, you're on the same page.
Maybe
I'm gonna show her this
you
video.
should wear her hat.
Nah.
You see, you don't want to wear her hat, right? To see how hard it was for her to work a full day, to come home, to take care of the kids, to cook you dinner, all that wonderful stuff that she did. And then for you to be sitting down with your foot up playing the video game.
Yeah, well, my wife doesn't wear hats, so I don't have to take her hat at all. Yeah, but no, of course you're going to side with her. So I'm going to edit in such a way that she doesn't see that, and she sees you totally siding with me.
Never. She
the
knows
magic of editing. No,
she'll call me and
listen.
Like,
she won't even believe, even if the video shows it. She knows that Connie would never say that, and that's
absolutely.
And that kind of sucks, you know. So moving forward. So this is actually a good thing too, guys. So guys, one of the things that people will say is that when you're changing your hat or whatever, I mean, we said building upon, but just for, you know, clarity a little bit, you know, we know we're building upon, we're never forgetting the foundation, but when you're changing the hats around, you know, kind of shifting the priority of the role, the one thing you must never do is change your personality.
Right.
Because you have changed your hat doesn't mean you change who you are. There's still consistency in who you are, even though the function may have changed. And the last thing you want to do is kind of switch hats and then totally become a totally different person, you know? So one of the things here, So one of the things here is don't change your personality. That's not about you becoming inconsistent and, you know, changing your hat and then changing your personality with you. No, you are the one wearing the hat. The hat is not wearing you. So again, to keep consistent, you always remember at the end of the day, you are still who you are in whatever function you're serving. What's your thoughts on that, Kai? That was a good one, right?
Yeah, there's no hat that's going to require you to stop being your authentic self, right?
Ooh,
like,
that's nice.
Whatever hat you wear, like the expectation, especially if you're entrusted to wear a different hat for a certain period of time, right? The expectation is that your authentic self is the person who's going to show up under that hat. You're going to still make the decisions you would have normally made, although perhaps with this new hat you have on, right? Your scope may have changed a little bit. You may have a little more authority, a little less authority, whatever that is. There is no expectation that you stop being you and you stop showing up. Right? Because if you're that super assertive person who's a go-getter, who's going to make sure you dot all your I's and cross all your T's, maybe you've been entrusted with that hat for that same reason. Right? And so for you to all of a sudden become the slacker because now you got this new hat and you want to delegate everything, that can be a problem.
I agree. And to be honest with you guys, I've seen that happen. I've seen people change, and then it's like, well, I had to do this because now I'm playing this role. It's like, no, you don't. You know, at the end of the day, you are still who you are, and the consistency, no matter what hat you switch into, you know, should always remain the same. Because at the end of the day, we're switching hats all day, and last thing we want is to lose ourselves as we're switching hats. I mean, the one thing it is I'm handing over a hat, but I'm not changing who I am. So, you know, and trust me, in this profession, it could be very confusing because we're playing different roles, but never once are we changing who we are. And I think that's really key advice, especially because how many times we are going back and forth depending on the situations that occur. Because that's another thing, guys, the switching of hats, or, you know, adding on, but the switching of hats is really dependent on the situation we're in and our ability to adapt and adjust. So the last thing we want is to lose who we are why we're going through this. Because once we lose who we are, we don't find ourselves again, ever. I'm telling you that right now. Once we lose who we are, we during this switch back and forth, we start to kind of literally lose all bearing, because even at the end of the day, be honest with you, when I take on a different role, I don't change my thinking patterns.
Right.
I still am going to be that person that is going to look to solve a problem or whatever it is. So again, don't lose yourself because your role has changed. Keep consistent and commit to the new function. Remain flexible. So that's the next one. And I kind of talks about we've been kind of discussing that throughout, but I mean, this is pretty simple. I mean, if in corrections, if you don't remain flexible, you're not going to allow yourself to adapt and adjust to situations that really you cannot control. I mean, in corrections, you are going to be facing situations that you have no control of, and you have to react to gain some level of control. And then eventually, you will get control. But at the very beginning, you're going to be facing so many things that if you don't adapt and adjust and you're not flexible, the situation will control you. So I think being flexible, because I've seen people, Connie, that have literally tried to address every situation in the same manner. And that doesn't work, because every situation or every inmate you deal with requires a certain finesse, a certain ability to adapt and adjust depending on what's being thrown at you. And if you're not able to do that, you're going to realize at the end of the day, you're the one that's being controlled, not the situation, because then you become very, very, very predictable.
Yeah.
Connie, any thoughts on being flexible or?
Yeah, I mean, I think flexibility is just critical. I think that is something that we can't get around just because our environment causes for us to be flexible. I think certainly there may be some situations where we can't necessarily bend on the policies and procedures and such. But when we do have a situation that may be a new situation that's presented, or something that we're not super familiar with, there's a level of flexibility we have to have in order to come to the solution, right? Or come to resolution on it. But either way, I think that the flexibility is critical for us.
Yeah. And guys, to be honest with you, even policy procedures, I mean, sometimes matters don't always fit so well, or situations always fit so well in policy and procedure. So discretion is also our ability to be flexible, utilizing strategic discretion. So we don't hold ourselves to certain situations that don't fit into policy and procedure. We don't hold ourselves to hit those parameters. I mean, eventually we'll draw it back to policy and procedure, but sometimes we have to adapt and adjust and then bring things back. But if you're strictly defined by what policy says and you're afraid to utilize discretion, then you're going to realize that you're never going to solve any issue, because 90% of the time, every situation we face usually results in our effort to bring things back to policy. So we know where we have to head. We just got to kind of be flexible sometimes in how we're going to get there. I mean, that's the key. That's more of the procedure. Last thing we got, and this is important, don't neglect any hat you are responsible to wear. So, Connie, let me mention this, because this is where kind of could be a little bit controversial, because some people are going to probably question, well, how do you define responsibility? Because I know my role defines me as this, and you're telling me I got to go out this way. So how will I answer that? I'm sorry, guys. Common sense. No, I'm being honest. I'm not being rude, but I'm being honest. Common sense is really going to tell you, what needs to be done. Because if you commit yourself, again, it kind of deals with not being flexible, but if you're still trying out a role that really doesn't apply at this situation and you're expecting to solve it, insanity time, you know what I mean? You're going to go crazy because you're doing something that's not really going to help, but rather aggravate. Is there a time when you could be softer in your voice? Let's just say, just throwing out examples. But, having said that, you're right. If you stick to what you feel your job function is, that prescribed role, you're right. You can hold that all day. But having said that, because we face so many situations and our job is to always make an effort to solve it, be honest with you, in order for you to build your skill up, it really is not being afraid to make a decision that may lay outside of that defined role. But again, I'm not telling you to go too far outside. I get it, because there are certain things that you don't want to really cross too much into someone else's professional function. But it's kind of like kickstarting a little bit. Like if you have an inmate that killed themselves, you're not going to sit there and wait for medical to respond. You got some level of training to kickstart everything until medical comes in. That's common sense. Now, you could have some people that say, well, I'm not touching. That's not my role. I'm strictly custody. I'm union. And, sorry, put that in there. I'm union. I'm strictly custody. I'm not let medical come. And then something happens. People are going to ask you, well, first, are you trained to do that as an officer? Of course you are. You better be, because that is your response. And second thing is, since you've been trained, someone's going to ask you a very common sense question. Basically, got a guy dying. You are trained. Why didn't you do it? And then when you say, well, that's not my role, I'm not medical. Oh, you're done.
That's it.
Yeah, because you're done. Because at some point, you get judged by people who are going to look for common sense. What would a majority of people do in that situation? And that's when your role may not protect you to some extent. Now grant me, guys, there's a balance here, because in some extent it will. And when I talk about that, that's more of the extreme of things. But when it comes to kickstarting and making sure we're in the right direction, people are going to assume that your role should be able to handle that, especially as a correctional officer. And I'm sure maybe Connie could talk a little bit more on the civilian side, but a correctional officer by training encompasses so many areas of expertise that it gives us the ability to kickstart things in so many different directions. So if you have the training like that, and you still try to say that your role is limited to just safety and security, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're 100% wrong, because you're being trained on, yes, a good foundation is safety and security, but you're being trained on some level of universal application for many other tools in your book that could be utilized to de-escalate, preservation of life, whatever it is. So if you neglect to switch hats and you want to go ahead and use the role specific function that you're in, even though you've been trained in areas to help, you're going to be held accountable when things go to the higher level. What's your thoughts on that, Connie? I'm sure medical sees that too, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you can never say that's not my job. That's all I can say. That's never a good answer. I mean, I think, situation presents itself. Even though we have pretty well-defined job descriptions, there's always a little section in it that says miscellaneous, or could be asked to do other things, like this. There's always some wiggle room in there that allows for you to go beyond whatever your prescribed role is. And I think, as long as it's within your training scope, you know what I mean? Because I know sometimes we get worried if I get involved and then there's some sort of adverse outcome and I wasn't trained to do this thing. Have I overextended myself, or, am I going to be protected? And if you used your best judgment in the moment with the information that you had, that's easily explained, right? Like, but you doing nothing, there's no explanation for it. And I think that's the thing we have to always bear in mind, that you did the best you could with what you had, with what you knew in the moment. And it may be an adverse outcome, or it could be a great outcome, right? But if you've done nothing, I feel like that's where you put yourself sort of in the line of fire.
Yeah, and Connie, I agree. I mean, there are going to be some people that listen to this that are very defined by that written role, that written prescribed role, which could be very limited to some extent. But then there's some people that have literally worked the profession, that build experience, and it kind of expands what it really means within context of, so you may have something written of what it takes, let's say, to be a correctional officer, these areas. But obviously we know that there's further meaning to every area in there. Once you have experience, safety could be elaborated a little more to cross into some softer skills, in connection to experiences, where even communicating with an inmate can lead towards better safety and security. But again, if you haven't lived the experience, you have no way to elaborate on that context. I get it. But having said that, everything pretty much can find a way related to those core descriptions of what your job function is. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, when it gets brought to the higher level, a lot of those descriptions could be seen as subjective. And then all of a sudden, people are arguing about your inaction to save a life, when technically you'd be in a better position to take the risk do what you can to save the life,
Mhm.
and then let people try to justify how you went outside your prescribed role. As long, listen, I want to get something clear real quick, just in case there's some trolls here. No one is saying to go to the extreme where, I'm an officer now, I'm playing the role of a surgeon, or a doctor. We're not talking about that level of extreme. We're talking about enough to show that we're committed to an action in an effort to solve a problem. And then when we're ready, we can hand it over to a professional where we haven't stopped, like passing off the baton.
Yep.
I know I may have to, as a correctional officer, I know that my role may have to cross into an initial part of someone else's function. But when someone comes up and that's their role, then here's the thing. I know when to step up and I know when to step away. You see the dance there? I know when to step up. Let me keep things going. Let me get it going. Oh, here's medical. Gotcha. Call me if you need me. So I want people to know that I'm not telling you to go so far out. I'm telling you to get involved when the hat depends on.
That happens with communication, right? Yes. So if you know that you are now changing your hat, shifting gears, shifting perspective, shifting into a different role, you have to communicate with the person who's now coming to take over, right? Like they have to be very clear that you are going to discontinue your course of action because they are now the higher level or the more experienced level or the whatever who that is appropriate for them to actually take the action, because I think even you and I may have seen a few videos where there wasn't the communication possibly between custody and medical when there was a code, and this one didn't know it was my time to jump in, and those few seconds of lack of communication can cost someone's life. So in any shifting of roles, when you are no longer going to assume the function, you need to make sure you communicate with the person who is now in control that, I'm stepping away so that you can take over.
Yep, to step up and step away. And guys, I mean, even though we had this dialogue, I mean, there's a lot of people that there's ambiguity here, of course. There's always going to be because, situations vary. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to tell people is that your job does require you to wear many hats. And you have to know, and I think it kind of sums it up, when it's your time to step up and take the role. So am I qualified to do so? Have I received training to do so? What's the timing for the right person to come in? So if I do have the training, how long is it going to take for medical? So, I mean, there's obviously a lot of questions that are going to be going through your head that at one point, the more you do it, it just becomes automatic. But I'm not telling you to do something blindly. I'm telling you to really evaluate the situation and ask yourself, am I capable and able of stepping up and helping kickstart what's got to be done until the right people can get involved? And then I know at that point when I got to step away and let the people get in. Because the last thing I want you to do is to take it over so much. Sorry, that's my daughter's friends kind of share the phone. But the last thing I want you to do is to take it up so much that the problem is that you don't know when to step away. And now you start messing with the other department's function. So guys, there is a balance there. Let's not forget about that. There is a balance there that allows for that partnership. I mean, we on the other side of what Connie said, we've seen people that didn't even have to communicate with each other and they worked perfectly, you know, because they've worked so well together. They know when priorities shift or they know when this person needs help. And again, that's through training, communication beforehand and whatever it is. But at the end of the day, for anybody to say that working in corrections doesn't require you to shift roles and functions, you'll never make it in this business, because I can't recall a day, even as middle management, where I'm not doing what I can to either take the role of something until someone else comes in, or understanding from someone's perspective, because at the end of the day, guys, I will tell you one thing. When I talk to my different departments as administration, their job, believe it or not, is to get me to see things through their eyes. And then my job is to get them to see things through my eyes. And then somewhere in the middle of that table, we connect. And then it paints a beautiful picture for everybody to see of something that we would like to feel is objective as best as can be. Because that's what it is, right, Connie? I come in and state my concerns, you state your concerns, we hit in the middle, and that could be where the objective picture is. But that doesn't happen, guys, if you're willing to only stay with the one hat. or not allow another hat to get on top, just for a second. I'm not talking about Priya. I know what you were thinking of right off the bat, Connie, because the way your mind works. No, I'm kidding. God, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would like to say, I think this was a really good discussion. For me, it's I think highlighting the skill required of critical thinking is key, right? Like we need, with all these hats that we wear, with the various situations that we're going to be faced with from day to day, critical thinking is the one skill that, like, I feel we have to always tap into, right? Because that is what is going to help us to always use our common sense, help us to look at things from different perspectives, bring those perspectives together. How do we get to this particular outcome, whatever the outcome we're looking for? Who do I need to contact? It's just all the things that I think may become second nature to some people, and some may have to work on it. Like, oh, I didn't even know I needed to call that person, or I didn't know that this was available to me, or I didn't know that this person did this thing, whatever that is, right? So for me, I think in all the hats that we wear, just remember to always critically think about the things that you are presented with so that you are making the best decision you can with the information you have.
Yeah, and obviously, kind of that's the best way to sum up the dialogue. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to tell you. Understanding your hat, understanding the role you have to play, never forgetting, of course, the foundation, but understanding how the hats build on each other and understand the role. I mean, that helps you become a decision maker too. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, if you don't understand what each function is, what function is needed during each situation, because you can't adapt and adjust, then you're going to freeze. And also, believe it or not, your solutions become very limited. You wind up getting stuck doing the same thing. And as I said before, you become very predictable. So inmates start to kind of, if I do this, you're going to do this. So being rigid is never the right thing, but understanding the different hats, the different functions, the different perspectives, still within your area of expertise to some extent, because you've been trained to wear many hats. So again, for departments, make sure your people are trained in the many functions that, require working in a prison, which includes, again, the softer skills. I mean, we're so quick to train some of the harder skills for custody and some of the softer skills for civilians, but maybe we can balance it. Give civilians a little bit more safety and security side of things, give custody some softer levels, some softer skills in teaching. Again, always to keep balanced. Again, we're not saying one dominates the other, but to keep balanced. And, being able to have that access to so many different things in your arsenal, because you're able to safely adapt and adjust to the different roles without losing who you are. That's kind of a roundabout what we talked about. So understanding the goal determines the function you have to play. That's going to help you in your decision making. I mean, 100%. And it's almost going to be, it's going to help you so well that next thing you know, all departments will agree with your decision, because sometimes we do something and only one party agrees because it comes from the bias we have. But if I'm able to switch hats and say, hey, before I do this, I know how mental health
bias are you talking about?
Well, we all have, yeah.
We don't have no.
We all have bias. Like, when Connie, what's cool, without losing who you are, this starts to become automatic. And then when you go to settle issues, automatically, it's without consciously doing it, you just know it. It's like, what, I'll do it this way, but I think mental health where'd that come from? Well, you know what, guys, I'm just so used to kind of seeing things from their perspective as well. And again, I just want to make sure people get what I'm trying to say one last time. All because you see something from someone else's perspective does not mean you change who you are. It does not mean you change your foundation of what your main role is. It just allows for that to help you make a well-informed decision. It brings in information that's a little bit more objective, as opposed to seeing things through the bias of one department.
I'm so proud of you. You've become so diplomatic.
Well, you haven't seen me at work, Remember, this is all a TV show. You know what I mean? Oh, my script is gone. My script is gone. Producer! Now I don't know what to say. No,
Oh,
I'm kidding.
yeah.
All right, guys. If you haven't, guys, don't forget, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Daughter's friends. Hit that bell. That bell is going to notify you every time I post up a video. Oh, and they're trying to FaceTime.
Even better.
Yeah, hold on. They don't give up, too. Little persistent kids.
Of course not.
No, they call once, you hang up. They call once. You even say, I'll text you back in a little bit. Why are you texting my kids? No, I'm speaking for my daughter. Because they don't stop calling.
Old, right?
Yeah, they don't stop calling. They call. And it's like, how many times you got to hang up? One time I got like 37 missed calls in a matter of 2 minutes?
Why aren't you answering?
And it's weird because I'm annoyed by it. But man, it's like I want to give them credit for being so persistent. Like they're not quitters, you know? So as a leader, I want to admire the fact that they don't quit.
They haven't given up.
But man, you're getting on my fucking nerves. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. I'll see you guys. Stay safe.
Oh my